The following podcast series is a production of Building Bridges of Asheville, North Carolina. This series presents in-depth discussions examining systemic racism in the Asheville area and the triumphant stories of Black citizens. On today's episode, our host, Building Bridges co-chair Stephanie Jones-Byrne, is joined by Racial Justice Coalition Executive Director Rob Thomas as they examine systemic racism in the criminal justice system.
Rob Thomas, thank you so much for being with us this evening. First, for our panel discussion about the legal system for the 59th session of Building Bridges. And I know you've done other panels for us, and we're so appreciative always of your time. And thank you for staying with us a little bit longer tonight to talk a little bit more about this topic and how it relates to the other topics that we discuss in Building Bridges. So I'd like to start with, if you don't mind, just introducing yourself. If you'll tell us a little bit about your background and what kind of work you're doing today.
Yes, so my name is Robert Elijah Thomas Jr. I am a 34-year-old African-American male, be 35 next month. I'm born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina. A little bit about my lived experience. I spent 11 years inside of the prison system and spent many decades as a Black man in America and have had all types of wild experiences related to both of these identities. What I currently do is a very broad work. I could say that I focus on systems change, but I'm focusing on multiple systems at one time. And, you know, what me and others that I've worked with identified as something that could greatly impact those systems with one swoop is reparations. So I'm currently doing a whole lot of reparations related work and also working in coalition with others to produce a truth and reconciliation process. So that's some of the things that I do. I could get more specific if you need me to.
And I will say, if you want to go ahead and talk about the organization in particular, you certainly can with Racial Justice Coalition, if you want to share more about that.
Yeah, so I'm the strategic coordinator for the Racial Justice Coalition. I have about 9 coworkers that I've been blessed to have. For a while, it was just me, but now we have an amazing team of individuals that they have amazing strengths that complement my weaknesses, and it's just been beautiful. I feel in the near future that all of my coworkers will be a lot more known. We've been doing a lot of internal relationship building to start out before just, of course, doing the work at the same time. But yeah, I work with the Racial Justice Coalition, which is not a normal nonprofit organization. Our structure is nowhere near like a normal structure. We move outside of a hierarchy, and I work with these individuals. I'm not their boss. I don't even do like traditional titles. Like I'm not an executive director. We're not even incorporated normally. We're incorporated as a worker-directed co-op, and we're currently trying to embed a community engagement governance model as our for our infrastructure. So basically, you'd have to kind of see us to actually understand exactly how we operate.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I that description, I think, helps frame sort of what we might hear a little bit from you about specifically the legal system. Something came up in the panel about whether or not it can be reformed. And you spoke about taking a both and approach, but acknowledging that what really needs to happen is fundamental change, that you can't just reform the current system. And it's the way you're talking about the organization and the people that you work with and how that's structured and how you're starting from the ground up with something different there seems to really parallel what you were saying about, how we need to rethink our systems. So I really, really appreciate hearing that from you. and learning a little bit more about Racial Justice Coalition. So with that, I'd like to invite you to just share a bit of your thinking about the criminal legal system as it is today, and specifically how race and racism show up and how it impacts, everybody, but people of color in particular.
So for me, public safety has about 4 main entry points. You have law enforcement, you have the court systems, you have the jail, and then you have the prisons. I guess I can specifically focus more on the prison side of things, just to keep things more in a perspective that I know extremely close. So for me, what I mean by reform is an illusion, right? To me, that's like, in not building, in the REI, they have this analogy of a lake, groundwater, and then you have the fish in the lake. To me, reform is, you may change the outcomes of some fish, but that lake is still so toxic that it's just so many things wrong with the lake. To me, I believe that the lake needs to be drained and more water put in it because the groundwater has been tainted. And what I mean by that is the whole ideology of our current prison system is faulty. Where we send individuals to prison and we don't take any time at all to understand why these individuals did what they did to get into prison. And over 85 to 90% of individuals that go into prison have release dates. So you're talking about public safety, and what you're sending people into is 9 times out of 10 a traumatic experience, a traumatic situation. And depending on what this individual did to get inside of this institution, that could compound the either the mental issues, the mental processes. It can compound the situation to where the individual can actually be worse, or come out of prison with something worse than what they came into it with, instead of looking at each situation as on a more individual basis, but kind of like a cookie cutter approach to where if you do this, you will probably get this unless you have, certain types of money and you're not Black. There's even situations where money can't get some Black people out of, but it can get other races of people out of it. So that, like, there's all these variables and factors, but the deck is stacked against the Black individual. And what that looks like being a Black person going in, for instance, a lot of these prisons are situated inside of extremely urban areas, like, woods, where the prison industry is the main industry and it employs people. So that's one of the factors why, some people don't want it to go away, because some people are, sustaining off of it, to where it's just the major industry in this locality. And also these areas, at least from a lot of the prisons that I've seen, are usually usually predominantly white areas. And so you have a prison population that is predominantly Black, that is in a slave position by the definition of the 13th Amendment. And you have the individuals with authority inside of this institution, the masters, if you will, who will most likely be white people. And, me looking at that and experiencing that, I've got several stories of being physically abused, being mentally abused, being spiritually abused, and not a whole lot you can do about it. And, the things you may decide to do can then be used against you, and consequences be applied to you to make your situation that much worse, because they have the power, the authority. And once you're inside of the institution, like, the word justice doesn't exist. You actually technically don't even have rights. You are property. If you were to harm yourself, you would be written up for destruction of state property and inflicting bodily harm to yourself. So like you're literally legally a slave. Like it's you have no rights.
Thank you for sharing that. That's true and heavy, and so I just appreciate you being willing to share that with us. I wonder if you wouldn't mind going back for a moment to, as you're talking about people who are in prison, basically being essentially enslaved people, and you referenced the 13th Amendment. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to say a little bit more about that for people who aren't aware of what the 13th Amendment said and what it meant about the supposed end of enslavement.
Yeah. So I can paraphrase. I'm not sure that I could be able to state the exact wording, but it pretty much goes like, the institution of slavery is now hereby abolished, except when duly convicted for a felony crime, which basically means if you commit a felony, you can legally be turned back into a slave. And what that looks like on my end, there were several jobs that were forced upon me in prison that if I did not take, you would face disciplinary action. Disciplinary action is solitary confinement, which looks like you being placed in a 6x9 cell for, let's see, I think that's a class C, for about 15 days for the first time. So you have 15 days inside of this room that you don't come out of. You get the 3 meals that they bring you are extremely small. The hunger is the worst because they feed you a meal. Your first meal of the day is like in between 3:30 and 4:30 in the morning. Your next meal is at 10:30. And then the last meal of the day is like at 3:30 or 4:30 in the afternoon. So until 4:30 that evening, until 3:30, 4:30 that next morning, you ain't getting nothing. Now, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock rolls around, you in there, you drinking water out the sink. Some people eating toothpaste, some people eating paper to try to curb the hunger that you face. But anyway, back to the slavery part. I knew exactly what it was. I knew that I was a slave on several of these jobs, and I told myself that in my first 2 to 2.5 years on my last 6-year sentence, that I was gonna get the jobs with the most merit days, because merit days can't be taken away from me. So the kitchen worked me 7 days a week for 12 hours a day. You don't get no days off, and I made $1 a day for working in the kitchen. Being a cook for most of the time, because I'm really good at cooking. But I've had several different positions in the kitchen. And I would have to get up at 2:30 in the morning, and I would usually get off of work about, in between 12:30 and 2:30, whichever time we wrapped up at lunchtime. And I did this for my first year, because you get 18 merit days a month. That's almost, for 30 days you're in there, you get 18 days. So I did that and saved up days. And then I got on this other program that was called Bridge. Now, Bridge was certified slavery. And I was stationed here in Asheville, North Carolina at Buncombe County Correctional Facility, let's see, BCC, Buncombe County Correctional Institute. And right, below Weaverville, extremely racist, but I don't have the time to even get into that. So I would go out and I would fight forest fires in the forest. We cut trees, but anyway, we usually have to hike a mile or in between 1 and 4 miles to get to the forest fire itself after driving to the site. Because, and our job, how you stop a forest fire is you create what's called a fire line. A fire line is you usually use the geography. Like if you've got a lake on this side of the fire, you know that you don't need a fire line there because the fire is not going to burn past the lake. You see which way the fire is coming. You have wind. You have all these different factors. So you see which way it's burning, and you want to build a line, what's called a fire line, to prevent that fire from spreading even further. A fire line is a 4 foot wide, about 2 to 2.5 feet deep trench, basically. And sometimes we would have to dig a fire line for like a mile or two down a mountainside. After we climb up it, and how we get it, we do it like in a line. You'd have people with different tools. You'd either have a hoe or a rake or a pickaxe, and you had some people, you had one person with a chainsaw, and then you had people that had several of the other tools. And we would get in the line, depending on what tool you had. If you had the pickaxe, you'd probably be first because you're going to strike the ground to soften it up a little bit. Or actually, no, you're not going to be first, because first you've got to dig through, I forget the technical term of it now because it's been a while. But you would have to, there's a layer of leaves and there's a layer of roots that you have to get through before you actually get to the soil. So, you have somebody with a rake, and you have somebody that hits it with the hoe, and you have somebody that hits it with the pickaxe, and then you have the individuals with a shovel. And like, you're pretty much just moving in a line, working down the mountain. And I remember it would be but well below freezing degrees, because the fire season is usually in the fall and the winter time, and then sometimes early spring before everything gets wet again. That's when everything is the driest. And I would be out there, and it's freezing cold, but I'm working so hard because I got all this fire equipment, this big backpack that I had to carry up the mountain with me with my waters and food and stuff in it. Like, I'm sweating, everybody's sweating. And if you stop working, now you're freezing. And so we had a slogan. The slogan was "the heat's in the handle," which the heat's in the handle of your tool. If you want some heat, you gotta keep working. And so you tell me if that ain't modern day slavery. I don't know what is. And I made at that job, I made like $7 a day. Now, some of the contracts they were getting, because we weren't always fighting fires. Like, I remember one time we went down to Madison YMCA or something, and we like cleared their hillside, cut the trees down, took the brush off and like mulched it up in a big grinder. And we do several other projects throughout the year. I remember seeing the paperwork in the dashboard of the car. Like, that one project alone was a $15,000 contract they had landed to do that job. We making $7 a day doing this. So you tell me where this money is. This money ain't going to us. But yeah, and of course, and then there was a whole lot of racial implications, because most of the bridge leaders was white. The white individuals that I was with out there we were extremely culturally different. That is the nicest way that I could say that. And and they made sure that they separated us as Black people. Like, they would make sure that we weren't all on one crew. Like, they have me and on this one, and my other friend on this one, and another friend on that one, to keep our numbers low, because they wanted to prevent us from like coming together and being able to push back against some of the things that happened. And I had all types of stories, but yeah, I've already taken up enough time and space talking about that. And there's several other jobs that I could say is blatant slavery. It is what it is.
Thank you for sharing that. And I mean, no, there are other stories. Just that one story, just paints such a vivid picture. And thank you again. During the panel, you said something that I found. You said a lot of impactful things. Everyone in the panel did, but I found particularly impactful when you were talking about whether or not the system could be reformed and what the system does now. And you alluded briefly to a justice that could be, in addition to actually being justice, more restorative or reparative. You said something about the fact that the way the system is now, it doesn't even necessarily serve the victims of crime, right? So even if people are being incarcerated for something they did, that's not even necessarily serving justice. And then, of course, the people who have been involved in the system once they're out continue to be punished for those crimes. And so I want to invite you to take a little time, if you would like, to talk a little bit about what a more restorative justice could look like.
Of course, I think there has to be consequences for certain things. I think that things like, rape, murder, like there's just no way around not having a punitive approach to something so serious and something so, so there are some things that we would actually need to really think through, like those things. But the thing is, we need to start the thinking. But basically, the approach that I'm talking about is not looking at everything with a punitive approach, with thinking that that's the solution. If I was a regular day citizen, which I am now, I would actually be afraid of our current carceral system, of the outcomes of it. Because, okay, if you have an individual who, is locked up for violence and you send them into an environment that is way more violent and like probably got a release date. Like I say, over 85 to 90% of individuals in prison have release dates. So they're coming back out to normal society. And you send this individual back out to normal society, that's like creating a ticking time bomb. And so we see all these things in the news where, people, the recidivism rate is high. And this is only one factor to that, of course. There are a whole lot of things such as systemic racism, being caught up in the system where people hold your past against you and you're not really being able to get a footing in society. But I want people to look at the reverse end of this. You've got, for instance, you've got an individual who's locked up for domestic violence or something, and you put them in there inside of a violent environment where you actually have to be violent to survive. Do you really think that individual's going to be less violent when they come home? Like, it just doesn't, those things logically don't make sense to me. And we need better solutions. And I mean, the metrics show improve. I remember looking at the metrics from from a domestic violence report where, Black men were shown as when they get incarcerated and come back, the ones who've been incarcerated for domestic violence actually have a higher percent chance of not only committing the domestic violence again, but committing a way harsher version of the domestic violence. And it's like, it makes complete sense to me. Like, you took an individual with an issue, and not saying that there shouldn't be consequences, because I completely should, but that's not rehabilitation. That's not, you can't look at the carceral system as a blanket solution for anything that society deems is not okay. You know what I mean? Like, we have to start thinking differently. Otherwise, it's just going to get worse. I mean, it's obviously not getting better. The data, the metrics is not getting better on anything. So, I mean, anybody with logical sense and reasoning would be like, okay, what we currently doing is not working. Like, I guess we can't scare people out of committing crimes. Like, it just doesn't work for everybody. On the reverse end, white individuals that go to jail for domestic violence, actually it shows a decrease. But what I will say is there is two different experiences. From my experience of being incarcerated, there are two different distinct experiences from a white person in jail and a Black person, not jail, but prison, and inside the prison system, and a Black person inside the prison system. And the same stigmas aren't so heavily applied to the white individual upon release either. Like, they have more opportunities to get their life back together.
Right. That's an important point. The fact that it doesn't, the punishment doesn't end with serving the sentence in terms of what folks have to face after being involved in the system, and that the racial disparities show up there as well, of course. So to end, as you know, Building Bridges does 4 different panels during our session on housing, where we talk to local Ashevilleans about their experiences, and the legal system, which you've been part of, as well as healthcare, which we'll be doing this week as of this recording, and education. which we talked about last week. And I just want to invite you to share your thoughts on how these things have interplay with one another, and how racism shows up in these systems, and how they connect and overlap.
Yeah, so racism is like the lifeblood of America, and it's just flowing throughout these systems that keep each other perpetuating. Like, for instance, let's look at the opportunity/achievement gap in the overall Black experience in the school system. So you have a lot of implicit biases that comes from not understanding the Black situation, and you have all of these other systems that play a role in affecting the opportunity/achievement gap. For instance, you have a Black child in class that falling asleep and disruptive, and grades are suffering and just looked at as a troubled child. Teacher who has no really good context on not only the history of America, but this Black child's experience, just thinks that they're a bad child and they need to be punished and this, that, and the third. Then you look at the Black child's experience themselves. They're inside of an environment where gunshots are going off at all hours of the night. They haven't really eaten that good, so it's hard for them to focus for the first couple periods because they're waiting on lunch so they can get a good meal in their stomachs, and they're irritable and disruptive. Also, their ACEs scores are off the chart. And then you dig a little bit deeper. Okay, well, their family resides in public housing, and their great-grandmother lost their house because of urban renewal and was forced inside of public housing. Then their grandfather attempted to get try to be one of the first progenitors of owning housing in their family, and the lending institutions wouldn't deal with him, and experienced all type of racism inside of the economic mobility sector, whether it was employment or starting his own business. So he just was never able to achieve that. Then you have the generation directly above him, where his father or was probably taken out of the household because of mass incarceration, and is subjected to slavery and all these other things. So he's been growing up in a community full of missing fathers, and there's a whole culture of trauma inside of these communities. Then you have the mother who's struggling, so she can't really spend the time with her child to make sure that he's doing the things he's supposed to be doing, or obtaining the grades, or tutoring the child, or just being there, because she don't got the disposable time, disposable income, or disposable energy. She's in survival mode. She's working 2 jobs just to survive, just to keep the food in the house, clothes over his head. The more she makes, the more she actually has to pay in public housing. So she's actually trying to make it out, but every time, she gets a job that's paying her a little bit, her rent goes up, and so does all of her bills, and she loses food stamps. So so you've got all these systematic things that are intertwined. That's only a small portion of it. That's like 4 different systems right there. I ain't even talked about healthcare and how the social determinants of health come into play and interact with everything just as well. And like, I could go on with days of how all of these things are affecting each other. And the only way we're going to really address it is a holistic approach. You put a Band-Aid here, you putting Band-Aids on gunshot wounds. Like, it's, let's infuse this area with $20,000 and give some grants so some people can go out and do some tutoring in the community. Well, how about you get these people their houses back that you took from their relatives, 50 years ago as a start? Like, it's so simple. You go back to what caused these situations. What did you take? What was done that the ripple effects that this is the outcome? You go back and you do the opposite of that. It's that simple. But people don't want to talk about that because words like capacity, and we don't have the resources, and equity and efficiency are 2 completely different things. The government focuses on efficiency. And so equity is always at odds with efficiency.
That's another excellent point. Equity is at odds with efficiency, and the idea that you look at the harm that was done and do the opposite. And do the opposite. Yeah.
They don't want to do that.
Yeah.
They don't want to do that at all.
Right.
That's not even a realistic thing to them. They're like, well, what else can we? We don't want to talk to this guy. He's talking about doing the opposite of what we did. It's not efficient.
Yeah.
Let's just have some cookouts and give a community a park and apologize for what we did while we still enjoy the fruits of our labor and watch you suffer and die slowly with inside of the outcomes that we produce. That is what's currently going on. Like everybody, they know what was done. They know. And nobody wants to talk about giving anything back. Nobody wants to talk about, just imagine the massive amount and shift of resources to address some of the things that was directly caused because of racism.
Well, and we can also look at what's been lost because of racism, and the fact that it's been lost by everybody in terms of, progress that hasn't been made, in all sorts of ways, because we've been mired in this systemic racism. But it's hard for folks to get to the point where they can see that it's not just about something being taken away from them to give to other people, that it's actually about, making everything better for everybody. But it's a hard hill to climb for some folks, it seems like, right?
And that's the truth that they've hidden from everybody, is how much does racism cost America a year? Just a year. And the number's been estimated in the trillions every year. And let's just look at one instance, for instance. Okay, a situation like urban renewal happens. First they divested in these communities. They divested, wouldn't invest any type of loans, redlined, all that. So all the money resources sucked out of these communities. They fall apart, they're in shambles, and now they're blighted. And so come around with the urban renewal program, like, oh, we want to beautify your community. And so they force people to sell their homes for extremely low rate. So then now they've got all of these vacant buildings, right? These vacant buildings and blighted and demolished buildings that haven't produced any revenue for decades. And so you look at it on the money lost just in taxes that a city could have made. If you would have left a house right here and the bank would have allowed the individual living in this house to actually invest and renovate it like the white communities could, tax value goes up. The business district, the businesses that were there that you took away to put in an interstate that goes nowhere or loops in just to disrupt the community. Like if you would have left this as a thriving business district, the tax money alone would be massive. It's a massive loss. And this is one specific situation, one specific instance, not to mention the cure to cancer might have been locked up in some Black child's brain that has been killed because of a racist situation, or all the other things that we don't know what the alternate realities would have been. And yeah, I mean, the numbers are out there, the metrics. Like I said, I've seen different numbers of what racism costs America every year and how it impacts us all. Like this isn't just about giving Black people more. It's like this helps out everybody, but they don't know. We're not looking at it like that. And that's not the narrative in the media. That's not the narrative the media wants to portray, because it does not benefit the individuals that are at the top at the end of the day. Like it doesn't benefit them to end classism and that separate thought. Like when we go back to the John Punch story of how racism truly got started. The first Black man to be sentenced to indefinite servitude because he escaped with, white slaves as well. And slave masters got like, oh, we can't have this. We can't have them teaming up with each other. So we gotta make it to where there's some differences in this situation. And we're still divided in that thinking. And we don't see that we all came together. This all benefits us all. This isn't about, oh, let's help out the Black people. This is, no, you're helping yourself out too by ending these things.
I think that's a great note to end on. And I want to be conscientious of your time. Again, so appreciative of your time and sharing your thoughts with us this evening. And so thank you so much again, Rob Thomas, for being with us and for the work that you're doing in the community. We appreciate it.
This has been a production of Building Bridges of Asheville. For more information, please visit our website at bbavl.org.